He shifted in his chair, the cape moving softly about him, and turned his face to the windows. The boy bent forward and checked the tape. Then he took another cassette from his briefcase and, begging the vampire's pardon, fitted it into place. I'm afraid I did ask something too personal. I didn't mean, he said anxiously to the vampire. You asked nothing of the sort, said the vampire, looking at him suddenly. It is a question right to the point. I feel love, and I felt some measure of love for Babette, though not the greatest love I've ever felt. It was foreshadowed in Babette. To return to my story, Babette's charity ball was a success, and her re-entry in social life assured by it. Her money generously underwrote any doubts in the minds of her suitors' families, and she married. On summer nights I used to visit her, never letting her see me or know that I was there. I came to see that she was happy, and, seeing her happy, I felt a happiness as a result. And to Babette I came now with Lestat. He would have killed the Freniers long ago if I hadn't stopped him, and he thought now that was what I meant to do. And what peace would that bring? I asked. You call me the idiot, and you've been the idiot all along. Do you think I don't know why you made me a vampire? You couldn't live by yourself. You couldn't manage even the simplest things. For years now I've managed everything while you sat about making a pretense of superiority. There's nothing left for you to tell me about life. I have no need of you and no use for you. It's you who need me. And if you touch but one of the Frenier slaves, I'll get rid of you. It will be a battle between us, and I needn't point that out to you. I have more wit to fare better in my little finger than you have in your entire frame. Do as I say. Well, this startled him, though it shouldn't have, and he protested he had much to tell me, of things and types of people I might kill who would cause sudden death, and places in the world I must never go, and so forth and so on. Nonsense that I could hardly endure. But I had no time for him. The overseer's lights were lit at Frenier. He was trying to quell the excitement of the runaway slaves and his own, and the fire of Point du Lac could be seen still against the sky. Babette was dressed and attending to business, having sent carriages to Point du Lac and slaves to help fight the blaze. The frightened runaways were kept away from the others, and at that point no one regarded their stories as any more than slave foolishness. Babette knew something dreadful had happened and suspected murder, never the supernatural. She was in the study making a note of the fire in the plantation diary when I found her. It was almost morning. I had only a few minutes to convince her she must help. I spoke to her at first, refusing to let her turn around, and calmly she listened. I told her I must have a room for the night to rest. I've never brought you harm. I ask you now for a key, and your promise that no one will try to enter the room until tonight. Then I'll tell you all. I was nearly desperate now. The sky was paling. Lestat was yards off in the orchard with the coffins. "But why have you come to me tonight?" she asked. And why not to you?" I replied. "Did I not help you at the very moment when you most needed guidance, when you alone stood strong among those who are dependent and weak? Did I not twice offer you good counsel? And haven't I watched over your happiness ever since?" I could see the figure of Lestat at the window. He was in a panic. "Give me the key to a room. Let no one come near it till nightfall. I swear to you, I would never bring you harm." "And if I don't? If I believe you come from the devil?" she said now, and meant to turn her head. I reached for the candle to put it out. She saw me standing with my back to the graying windows. "If you don't, and if you believe me to be the devil, I shall die," I said. "Give me the key. I could kill you now if I chose, do you see? and now I moved close to her and showed myself to her more completely, so that she gasped and drew back, holding to the arm of her chair. But I would not. I would die rather than kill you. I will die if you don't give me such a key as I ask. It was accomplished. What she thought, I do not know. But she gave me one of the ground floor storage rooms where wine was aged, and I am sure she saw Lestat and me bringing the coffins. I not only locked the door, but barricaded it. Lestat was up the next evening when I awoke. Then she kept her word. Yes, only she had gone a step further. Oh, sorry, that was the boy. Then she kept her word. Yes, only she had gone a step further. She had not only respected our locked door, she had locked it again from without. And the stories of the slaves, she'd heard them. Yes, she had. Lestat was the first to discover we were locked in, however. He became furious. He had planned to get to New Orleans as fast as possible. He was now completely suspicious of me. I only needed you as long as my father lived, he said, desperately trying to find some opening somewhere. The place was a dungeon. Now I won't put up with anything. I warn you. He didn't even wish to turn his back on me. I sat there straining to hear voices in the rooms above, wishing that he would shut up, not wishing to confide for a moment my feeling for Babette or my hopes. I was also thinking something else. You ask me about feeling and attachment. One of its aspects, detachment with feeling, I should say, is that you can think of two things at the same time. You can think that you are not safe and may die, and you can think of something very abstract and remote. And this was definitely so with me. I was thinking in that moment, wordlessly and rather deeply, how sublime friendship between Lestat and me might have been. How few impediments to it there would have been, and how much to be shared. Perhaps it was the closeness of Babette which caused me to feel it, for how could I truly ever come to know Babette, except, of course, through the one final way, to take her life, to become one with her in an embrace of death when my soul would become one with my heart and nourished with it. But my soul wanted to know Babette without my need to kill, without robbing her of every breath of life, every drop of blood. But Lestat, how we might have known each other. Had he been a man of character, a man of even a little thought? The old man's words came back to me. Lestat, a brilliant pupil, a lover of books that had been burned. I knew only the Lestat who sneered at my library, called it a pile of dust, ridiculed relentlessly my reading, my meditations. I became aware now that the house over our heads was quieting. Now and then feet moved and the boards creaked, and the light in the cracks of the boards gave a faint, uneven illumination. I could see Lestat feeling along the brick walls, his hard, enduring vampire face a twisted mask of human frustration. I was confident we must part ways at once, that I must, if necessary, put an ocean between us. And I realized that I'd tolerated him this long because of self-doubt. I'd fooled myself into believing I stayed for the old man, and for my sister and her husband. But I stayed with Lestat because I was afraid he did know the essential secrets as a vampire which I could not discover alone, and, more important, because he was the only one of my kind whom I knew. He had never told me how he had become a vampire, or where I might find a single other member of our kind. This troubled me greatly then, as much as it had for 4 years. I hated him, and I wanted to leave him. Yet could I leave him? Meantime, as all this passed through my thoughts, Lestat continued his diatribe. He didn't need me. He wasn't going to put up with anything, especially not any threat from the Frenières. We had to be ready when the door opened. Remember, he said to me finally, speed and strength, they cannot match us in that, and fear. Remember always to strike fear. Don't be sentimental now. You'll cost us everything." "You wish to be on your own after this?" I asked him. I wanted him to say it. I did not have the courage, or rather I did not yet know my own feelings. "I want to get to New Orleans," he said. "I was simply warning you. I don't need you. But to get out of here we need each other. You don't begin to know how to use your powers. You have no innate sense of what you are. Use your persuasive powers with this woman if she comes. But if she comes with others, then be prepared to act like what you are." "Which is what?" I asked him, because it had never seemed such a mystery to me as it did at that time. "What am I?" He was openly disgusted. He threw up his hands. "Be prepared," he said, now baring his magnificent teeth, "to kill." He looked suddenly at the boards overhead. "They're going to bed up there. Do you hear them?" After a long, silent time during which Lestat paced and I sat there musing, plumbing my mind for what I might do or say to Babette, or, deeper still, for the answer to a harder question, what did I feel for Babette? After a long time a light flared beneath the door. Lestat was poised to jump whoever should open it. It was Babette alone, and she entered with a lamp, not seeing Lestat, who stood behind her, but looking directly at me. I had never seen her as she looked then. Her hair was down for bed, a mass of dark waves behind her white dressing gown, and her face was tight and worry with fear. This gave it a feverish radiance and made her large brown eyes all the more huge. As I have told you, I loved her strength and honesty, the greatness of her soul, and I did not feel passion for her as you would feel it. But I found her more alluring than any woman I'd known in mortal life. Even in the severe dressing gown, her arms and breasts were round and soft, and she seemed to me an intriguing soul clothed in rich, mysterious flesh. I, who am hard and spare and dedicated to a purpose, felt drawn to her irresistibly, and, knowing it could only culminate in death, I turned away from her at once, wondering if when she gazed into my eyes she found them dead and soulless. "You are the one who came to me before," she said now as if she hadn't been sure. "And you are the owner of Point du Lac." "You are." I knew as she spoke that she must have heard the wildest stories of last night, and there would be no convincing her of any lie. I had used my unnatural appearance twice to reach her, to speak to her. I could not hide it or minimize it now. "I mean you no harm," I said to her. "I need only a carriage and horses. The horses I left last night in the pasture." She didn't seem to hear my words. She drew closer, determined to catch me in the circle of her light. And then I saw Lestat behind her, his shadow merging with her shadow on the brick wall. He was anxious and dangerous. "You will give me the carriage," I insisted. She was looking at me now, the lamp raised, and just when I meant to look away, I saw her face change. It went still, blank, as if her soul were losing its consciousness. She closed her eyes and shook her head. It occurred to me that I had somehow caused her to go into a trance without any effort on my part. "What are you?" she whispered. "You're from the devil. You were from the devil when you came to me." "The devil," I answered her. This distressed me more than I thought I could be distressed. If she believed this, then she would think my counsel bad. She would question herself. Her life was rich and good, and I knew she mustn't do this. Like all strong people, she suffered always a measure of loneliness. She was a marginal outsider, a secret infidel of a certain sort, and the balance by which she lived might be upset if she were to question her own goodness. She stared at me with undisguised horror. It was as if in horror she forgot her own vulnerable position. And now Lestat, who was drawn to weakness like a parched man to water, grabbed her wrist, and she screamed and dropped the lamp. The flames leaped in the splattered oil, and Lestat pulled her backwards towards the open door. "You get the carriage," he said to her. "Get it now, and the horses. You are in mortal danger. Don't talk to devils." I stomped on the flames and went for Lestat, shouting at him to leave her. He held her by both wrists, and she was furious. "You'll rouse the house if you don't shut up," he said to me, "and I'll kill her. Get the carriage. Lead us. Talk to the stable boy," he said to her, pushing her into the open air. We moved slowly across the dark court, my distress almost unbearable. Lestat ahead of me, and before us both Babette, who moved backwards, her eyes peering at us in the dark. Suddenly she stopped. One dim light burned in the house above. "I'll get you nothing," she said. I reached for Lestat's arm and told him I must handle this. "She'll reveal us to everyone unless you let me talk to her," I whispered to him. "Then get yourself in check," he said disgustedly. "Be strong. Don't quibble with her." "You go as I talk. Go to the stables and get the carriage and the horses, but don't kill." Whether he'd obey me or not, I didn't know, but he darted away just as I stepped up to Babette. Her face was a mixture of fury and resolution. She said, "Get thee behind me, Satan!" And I stood there before her then, speechless, just holding her in my glance as surely as she held me. If she could hear Lestat in the night, she gave no indication. Her hatred of me burned like fire. "Why do you say this to me?" I asked. "Was the counsel I gave you bad? Did I do you harm? I came to help you, to give you strength. I thought only of you when I had no need to think of you at all." She shook her head. "But why? Why do you talk to me like this?" she asked. "I know what you've done at Point du Lac. You've lived there like a devil. The slaves are wild with stories. All day men have been on the river road on the way to Point du Lac. My husband was there. He saw the house in ruins, the bodies of slaves throughout the orchards, the fields. What are you? Why do you speak to me gently? What do you want of me?" She clung now to the pillars of the porch and was backing slowly to the staircase. Something moved above in the lighted window. "I cannot give you such answers now," I said to her. "Believe me when I tell you I came to you only to do you good. And would not have brought worry and care to you last night for anything, had I the choice." The vampire stopped. The boy sat forward, his eyes wide. The vampire was frozen, staring off, lost in thoughts, his memory. And the boy looked down suddenly, as if this were the respectful thing to do. He glanced again at the vampire, and then away, his own face as distressed as the vampire's, and then he started to say something, but he stopped. The vampire turned towards him and studied him, so that the boy flushed and looked away again anxiously. But then he raised his eyes and looked into the vampire's eyes. He swallowed, but he held the vampire's gaze. "Is this what you want?" the vampire whispered. "Is this what you wanted to hear?" He moved the chair back soundlessly and walked to the window. The boy sat as if stunned, looking at his broad shoulders and the long mass of the cape. The vampire turned his head slightly. "You don't answer me. I'm not giving you what you want, am I? You wanted an interview, something to broadcast on the radio." "That doesn't matter. I'll throw the tapes away if you want." The boy rose. "I can't say I understand all you're telling me. You'd know I was lying if I said I did, so how can I ask you to go on except to say what I do understand? What I do understand is like nothing I've ever understood before." He took a step towards the vampire. The vampire appeared to be looking down into Visadero Street. Then he turned his head slowly and looked at the boy and smiled. His face was serene and almost affectionate, and the boy suddenly felt uncomfortable. He shoved his hands into his pockets and turned towards the table. Then he looked at the vampire tentatively and said, "Will you please go on?" The vampire turned with folded arms and leaned against the window. "Why?" he asked. The boy was at a loss. "Because I want to hear it," he shrugged. "Because I want to know what happened." "All right," said the vampire with the same smile playing on his lips, and he went back to the chair and sat opposite the boy and turned the recorder just a little and said, "Marvelous contraption, really. So let me go on. You must understand that what I felt for Babette now was a desire for communication stronger than any other desire I then felt, except for the physical desire for blood. It was so strong in me, this desire, that it made me feel the depth of my capacity for loneliness. When I had spoken to her before, there had been a brief but direct communication which was as simple and as satisfying as taking a person's hand, clasping it, letting it go gently. All this in a moment of great need and distress, but now we were at odds. To Babette I was a monster, and I found it horrible to myself and would have done anything to overcome her feeling. I told her the counsel I'd given her was right, that no instrument of the devil could do right even if he chose. "I know," she answered me, but by this she meant that she could no more trust me than the devil himself. I approached her and she moved back. I raised my hand and she shrank, clutching for the railing. "All right then," I said, feeling a terrible exasperation. "Why did you protect me last night? Why have you come to me alone?" What I saw in her face was cunning. She had a reason, but she would by no means reveal it to me. It was impossible for her to speak to me freely, openly, to give me the communication I desired. I felt weary looking at her. The night was already late, and I could see and hear that Lestat had stolen into the wine cellar and taken our caskets, and I had need to get away, and other needs besides, the need to kill and drink. But it wasn't that which made me weary. It was something else, something far worse. It was as if this night were only one of thousands of nights, world without end, night curving into night to make a great arching line of which I couldn't see the end, a night in which I roamed alone under cold, mindless stars. I think I turned away from her and put my hand to my eyes. I felt oppressed and weak suddenly. I think I was making some sound without my will, and then on this vast and desolate landscape of night, where I was standing alone and where Babette was only an illusion, I saw suddenly a possibility that I'd never considered before, a possibility from which I'd fled, wrapped as if I was with the world, fallen into the senses of the vampire, in love with colour and shape and sound and singing and softness and infinite variation. Babette was moving, but I took no note of it. She was taking something from her pocket. Her great ring of household keys jingled there. She was moving up the steps. Let her go away, I was thinking. "Creature of the devil," I whispered. "Get thee behind me, Satan," I repeated. I turned to look at her now. She was frozen on the steps, with wide, suspicious eyes. She'd reached the lantern which hung on the wall, and she held it in her hands, just staring at me, holding it tight like a valuable purse. "You think I come from the devil?" I asked her. She quickly moved her left fingers around the hook of the lantern, and with her right hand she made the sign of the cross, the Latin words barely audible to me, and her face blanched and her eyebrows rose when there was absolutely no change because of it. "Did you expect me to go up in a puff of smoke?" I asked her. I drew closer now, for I had gained detachment from her by virtue of my thoughts. "And where would I go?" I asked her. "And where would I go? To hell, from whence I came. To the devil, from whom I came." I stood at the foot of the steps. "Suppose I told you I know nothing of the devil? Suppose I told you that I do not even know if he exists? It was the devil I'd seen upon the landscape of my thoughts. It was the devil about whom I thought now. I turned away from her. She wasn't hearing me as you are now. She wasn't listening. I looked up at the stars. Lestat was ready. I knew it. It was as if he'd been ready there with the carriage for years, and she had stood upon the step for years. I had the sudden sensation my brother was there, and had been there for ages also, and that he was talking to me low in an excited voice, and what he was saying was desperately important, but it was going away from me as fast as he said it, like the rustle of rats in the rafters of an immense house. There was a scraping sound and a burst of light. I don't know whether I am from the devil or not. I don't know what I am, I shouted at Babette, my voice deafening in my own sensitive ears. I am to live to the end of the world, and I do not even know what I am. But the light flared before me. It was the lantern which she had lit with a match and held now so I couldn't see her face. For a moment I could see nothing but the light, and then the great weight of the lantern struck me full force in the chest, and the glass shattered on the bricks, and the flames roared on my legs, in my face. Lestat was shouting from the darkness. Put it out! Put it out, idiot! It'll consume you! And I felt something thrashing me wildly in my blindness. It was Lestat's jacket. I'd fallen helpless back against the pillar, helpless as much from the fire and the blow as from the knowledge that Babette meant to destroy me, as from the knowledge that I did not know what I was. All this happened in a matter of seconds. The fire was out, and I knelt in the dark with my hands on the bricks. Lestat at the top of the stairs had Babette again. Lestat at the top of the stairs had Babette again, and I flew up after him, grabbing him about the neck and pulling him backwards. He turned on me, enraged, and kicked me, but I clung to him and pulled him down on top of me to the bottom. Babette was petrified. I saw her dark outline against the sky and the glint of light in her eyes. Come on, then, Lestat said, scrambling to his feet. Babette was putting her hand to her throat. My injured eyes strained to gather the light to see her. Her throat bled. Remember, I said to her, I might have killed you, or let him kill you. I did not. You called me devil. You are wrong. Then you'd stop Lestat just in time, said the boy. Yes, Lestat could kill and drink like a bolt of lightning, but I had only saved Babette's physical life. I was not to know that until later. And that's where we'll leave it for today. Alright, so that's another 10 pages. What are some of the cool things that we see happening over that 10 pages? I think one of the thing that makes up most of that section is Louis's attempt at this possession of Babette naturally falling apart in the way it was kind of always doomed to do, as I've been hinting at. It comes with this kind of central, I guess, cognitive dissonance from Louis, where he can't figure out why Babette is mad at him. He genuinely can't figure out why Babette thinks he's a horrible, evil monster. He wonders why she's really, really scared of him and is calling him a devil, despite the fact that he and Lestat have left a literal trail of dead people between the burning ruin of Pointe du Lac and the Freniere plantation. It's kind of unclear to me. Louis says he doesn't kill people. That's obviously untrue, because he's killed at least 2 people that we know of to this point. And the way he talks about his departure from Pointe du Lac, it sounds like he's killing people as well as Lestat. But he clearly is killing people. He might not kill people to feed, but that doesn't mean he's not killing people. And that's why he's being perceived in this monstrous nature, because he is acting in a monstrous manner. He egotistically attempted to position himself as this angel for Babette, but he ended up being perceived as a devil because of his actions, because of the way that he led effectively to the deaths of many, many people outside Point du Lac, because of his fostering of Lestat and his encouragement of Lestat's behaviors and his own actions. Like, I can't stress enough that from the perspective of the novel, it feels like Babette was fine on her own. Babette was doing kind of all right without Louis's advice. Yeah, she was gonna struggle, but like, is it really claiming that all like Babette needed was Louis to just come up to her and be like, "Yo, you can do it," and that was what gave her the courage? No, it seems like Babette was pretty strong on her own and would have been fine. Which leads to a conclusion that Louis's interruption here and Louis's attempt to possess her is very self-serving, and in this self-serving attempt at possession, he ultimately harms her. He wonders why she perceived his counsel as, like, bad in the context of him being a mass murderer. Like, I don't know why he questions the fact that she is a bit iffy on having, like, taken his advice when he is a creature of evil and he goes around in a monstrous manner. His arrival at the Frenier plantation is even kind of reminiscent of... It gave me kind of vibes of the scene in Melmoth the Wanderer, where there is the marriage between the Melmoth, Emily, and the overseen by this skeletal figure out of sight. It's very, very gothic in feel, and it just highlights the dark spirit, devilish feel that Louis is kind of bringing forward. And more to the point, I think, at the end, when Louis makes this terribly narcissistic claim that he's like, "I'm not a devil, and I just proved it to you because I could have killed you if I wanted to." What abusive language from Louis. What a horrible thing to say to someone. I could have killed you if I wanted, therefore I'm a good person. No, there is a much stricter requirement for being a good person than not killing people whenever you have the opportunity. And Louis hasn't recognized that. And he's just going to slip more and more into this inhumanity as the text goes forward, because he is using this supposed detachment as an excuse to avoid consequences of his actions. He is pretending he doesn't care in the grand sense, because then he never has to reckon with the evil results of the evil things he does. Another thing that we see in this set of 10 pages is just how pathetic Lestat really is. Lestat needs Louis. In the same way Louis kind of narcissistically fawns over Babette in his impotent desire to protect her, Lestat is fawning over Louis in his need to possess him, to have abusive, manipulative, gaslighting control over Louis. He is actively creating this abusive dynamic, and we've seen it constantly throughout the novel, but it's worth reiterating that every second Lestat is belittling Louis, berating him, and saying that he doesn't need him. But the second it comes down to it, Lestat won't go anywhere without him. He even extinguishes the flames on Louis in order to keep him alive. Because Lestat knows that if Louis dies or leaves, then he no longer has someone that he can hold power over, no longer has someone he can possess and abuse in the manner that befits his personality. Another prime instance of control mechanisms that Lestat is employing here is the withholding of vampire knowledge. Lestat wants Louis to fully believe that he needs him. He says that there are ways that you can die that you don't know about. There are places you shouldn't go that you don't know about. And the only reason he doesn't tell Louis these things is because he wants to control him. He wants to possess him. He wants to abuse him. And this abusive strategy has worked. Louis, the combination of this belittlement, abuse, control, this withholding of information, has combined with the prior trauma Lestat has inflicted upon Louis and led to this kind of Stockholm syndrome where Louis does genuinely doubt whether or not he can leave. Louis doesn't know. Louis feels like maybe he can't leave. Maybe Lestat does know something really important. And ultimately, of course, he doesn't. I mean, we can talk about the other books where Lestat knows everything, of course, but maybe one day I'll talk about the other books in the Vampire Chronicles. I don't, even though they are a massive expansion upon Lestat's character, I don't think those books do anything to make me view Lestat as anything but an abusive, manipulating, pathetic, monstrously evil creature. Lestat is disgusting, and the way he behaves and the way he treats people is not something to really idealize. He's terrible. He's the worst. It's the point where if it weren't for the fact that Louis was also quite a horrible person in the way he behaves and treats people, you would feel quite sorry for Louis for the way he is being abused and manipulated by Lestat. The vampires in this text are really bad people. They're terrible. They're just not nice. But anyway, we'll talk. I went off on a minor tangent there, but we'll deal with that more as it goes throughout the book, and I'll try and expand that argument to something more extensive than just Lestat isn't nice. But there's one really, really cool moment in this set of 10 pages, and it's where, essentially, in regards to the perception of Louis as an angel and a devil, we see the crisis of faith theme reaching one of its first major moments within the text. Because Louis, obviously, considering his sort of Catholic upbringing, which mirrors Anne Rice's Catholic upbringing, Louis defines himself in these spiritual terms. His worldview, the way he interacts, is based off of spirituality. He defines himself as an angel in dealing with Babette. He questions his status as devil when confronted with it by Babette. And because of his usage of these terms, and because of his realization that he's using these terms without them actually being true, he's kind of forced to internally reckon with secularism, with the notion that God might not exist and these terms might not mean anything. And the truly terrible kind of conflict for Louis in this regard is the fact that as an immortal creature, he can never actually truly know if the spiritual exist. He's kind of forced into a state of eternal doubt. And this metaphorical state of this immortal creature never being able to know whether God exists kind of encapsulates this crisis of faith, where it's a little capsule of religious anxiety, where you can just see the crisis of faith as it's being like written. You can just feel it oozing off of the pages, this internal doubt regarding spirituality, the wanting to engage with the world on spiritual terms, but not really being able to accept its existence because there's no practical evidence for it. In a way, Louis exists in a quite literal manifestation of hell, where if we consider hell as separation from God, as it's very, very often defined, Louis is separated from God on every level. He can never potentially meet God because he won't die, but he also will never meet God because he'll never be able to conclude if God exists. And that is just mirroring a crisis of faith in the real world. The fact that you can never be fully certain of any level of spiritual existence or non-existence. No matter what you do, you will always be confronted by this doubt, and it will always berate you, and you'll never be able to speak with true certainty on any of these issues, no matter how hard you try. And that is agonizing. And it is really powerful. And it's such a good aspect of this novel. And this is the first time it really, really gets highlighted. And it only gets better on that front as it advances. So, with all that in mind, that is another 10 pages, and I will be back tomorrow with the next part. So I'll see you then.